Good morning. Yes, it is Call the Cabinet. 3 minutes after 9 on Monday, May the 24th. I'm delighted to welcome taking the calls. This time is the International Trade Secretary and Minister for Women and Equalities, Liz Truss, who is suitably socially distanced, of course, from me, although I think we're allowed to get a little bit closer than we were, but I'm never really sure. But anyway, we have the right distance between us. Your questions in just a moment, but I know, thank you for coming in. Great to have you here, Secretary of State. Thank you for your time. And I know you're keen to talk about the importance of Trade Track, which I think started in March, but moves on again. Before we take the first call, details on that. Morning.
So this week we've got a meeting of the G7 Trade Track. And what this is about it's about working with like-minded democracies like the United States and Japan to make trade fairer. Because at the moment we are seeing unfair practices going on, whether it's IP violations, unfair subsidies in industries like steel. So we've seen the capacity of the steel industry rise by 40%. And what we want to make sure is British manufacturers, whether in steel or ceramics, are facing fair competition. And we're working with the likes of the United States, Japan, and indeed the EU to challenge countries like China who are not playing by the rules.
This is a new World Trade Organisation, or World Health Organisation, then, is it?
It's a new World Trade Organisation. The fact is the organisation hasn't caught up with the modern world. It hasn't done enough.
So what do they say? What do the what's the WTO say?
Well, there's a new Director General, Dr. Ngozi. She wants to change things. She wants to change the way the organisation works. But I think people lose faith in trade when they don't think it's fair. So that is what we're doing. We're working to make the rules fair
within
and make
WTO,
sure China play by the rules within the WTO.
You want this to be part of WTO?
Absolutely.
And what do you want to come out of the next meeting, just lastly, before we go to the first
Well,
call?
what I want is an agreement that we are going to see things like unfair industrial subsidies stopped. We are going to see much more transparency from countries like China about what they're actually doing. And we're going to see a resolution in industries like steel to make sure that our companies can fairly compete.
All right. Thanks for the background on that. Let's go to the first question, and it's Will in Doddington, which from knowledge I think is in Kent. Will, you're on the radio. Will, go ahead. Will, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Yes, Will. You're through to the...
I'm a farmer, and I know a lot of farmers, including myself, who are extremely concerned about the Australia trade deal and the tariff-free access to UK markets for their producers. Secretary of State, how will you answer the concerns of farmers in this country who are quite rightly worried about animal welfare standards, hormonal growth promoters, competition and being forced out of business?
Can I just ask what you farm? What sort of farmer you are?
We are a mixed farm. We're a livestock farm, farming beef, lamb, pigs and chickens. It's all free range and very extensive, and we're trying to form a company that produces climate beneficial food and fibre.
Okay.
So,
good background. We'll stay on the line. Let's hear from Liz Truss, Secretary of State.
We have a fantastic farming industry in the UK, and I fully believe that our farmers can and do compete around the world. So we've just opened up the market to the United States. We're likely to see a rapid growth in British beef exports there. And there are huge opportunities in the Asia-Pacific region, in countries like Vietnam, the Philippines.
OK, can we address the Australian issue, though?
Yeah, but what the Australia deal does is it opens the doors to that wider Asia-Pacific region where prices are higher for products like beef and lamb. So this is an overall opportunity for British farmers. He can't sell his beef
into Australia now?
He can.
But so what's the difference?
Well, there aren't tariffs to Australia, but there are tariffs in other parts of the Asia-Pacific.
They're not getting... Will and colleagues such as... He's not getting anything that he's not got now, is he?
Australia is going to open the door to the CPTPP, where there will be lower tariffs. And just on the subject of Australia are not competitive in lamb. Currently, their lamb prices into the UK are higher than we can produce lamb at.
Right.
Hold
on. But just to clarify, so Will can already sell his sausages or beef into Australia, but now Australia can sell into the United Kingdom without tariffs. And so there is a danger, I read, that we'll be flooded with hormone-implanted beef.
Well, we won't, because we have banned hormone-injected beef. Hormone-injected beef will not be allowed in the UK, full stop.
But other beef...
So he doesn't need to worry about that.
OK, well, let's go back to Will. Are any of your concerns calmed?
Well, I just want to make sure that the standards of the food coming into this country are on a level playing field to, equal to and hopefully better than what we've got in our country at the moment. And I just, from a health point of view, I don't want people to be buying hormonal
that's going to be banned.
growth-induced beef.
Yeah, and
that will be banned.
Yes, that is banned already. We already import Australian beef and lamb into the UK. That Australian beef and lamb has to fit UK standards.
But will it be cheaper? There is a concern that Australia can farm at a far greater number. They have like super farms as opposed to the smaller farms of the United Kingdom. Is that an active concern?
UK beef is very competitive and we're already exporting it to markets around the world. So I am fully confident that our farmers will be able to compete. And I'd point out to you, Nick, that currently the EU have tariff-free, quota-free access to the UK. And they're a much bigger beef producer than Australia. So we already import over 200,000 tonnes of beef from the EU. So what we're talking about is in the long term, so this is not going to happen quickly, there'll be a very long transition period, allowing Australia the same kind of access that the EU already have.
And how will we distinguish? How will we make sure that beef that's hormone injected or implanted won't get into the food chain?
We have export health certificates that stop that happening.
So there's no
I can
way-
absolutely guarantee that no hormone injected beef will be entering the United Kingdom.
Thanks, Will. Good luck to you with your farming down in Kent. Terry in Plymouth. Terry, you're through to the Secretary of State. Go ahead, Terry. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. I'm a fisheries consultant.
We spoke briefly,
and
yes.
I've spent the last year working with a not-for-profit Call for Fish, trying to help sell our fish at home. So, Secretary of State, I'm interested, what, if any, consideration have you given to our fishing industry? Our coastal communities are hanging on by their fingernails. The EU is our main trading bloc, and your trade and cooperation agreement has decimated that. And now you want to dump cheap imports into our market when we're struggling to sell what we catch.
Well, what we are looking for in all of the deals we strike is better access for British seafood into markets around the world. So whether it's into Australia, whether it's into the wider Asia Pacific, whether it's into the United States through our US trade deal, we're currently negotiating with Norway about better access there. So what we need to do is, if we want to get access to others' markets, which we do, right, I believe that we have a fantastic product here in the United
Surely
Kingdom.
the European Union is the biggest market for our fish.
It's a big market at the moment, but I think it's very important, to use another agricultural metaphor, we don't have all our eggs in one basket.
Right.
And we do have alternatives and options. So what I am working on is getting wider
getting our
access.
fish into Vietnam, but then turn away from the European Union.
We already sell products like crab into China, Nick. And it commands a very high price.
Terry, Terry, you tell me, which is the more important customer, the developing markets or the European Union?
Yeah, I'm afraid that just shows a total misunderstanding of the products that we catch and where we sell. Secretary of State's absolutely correct. Our exporters already do a fantastic job of accessing lots of markets. But getting back to Australia, they export over 50% of it, or around 50% of their seafood at the moment. But their imports are cheap fillets that come from countries like Thailand. We're never going to be able to produce and compete with those cheap imports from where they get, primarily because the majority of the products we catch in UK waters are prime products. They're high-end, high-value, and that isn't something that Australia imports.
Liz Truss.
Well, the caller is absolutely right that Britain is a premium exporter. But what we're seeing across the world is a growth in demand for premium products. So, for example, grass-fed beef in America, the demand for that is rising by 15% a year. And we're now exporting our beef from Northern Ireland and Wales into the United States. There's huge demand for premium products also in Asia Pacific. By 2030, 2/3 of the world's middle class are going to be in Asia Pacific. And they're going to want to buy high-end British beef, high-end British lamb, quality products produced with high standards. So I really think we don't need to fear the future. There's a huge opportunity here for us to get. And a key point, Nick, as well as being a good deal in itself, the Australia deal is the gateway to that wider CPTPP deal, access to £9 trillion worth of GDP and a growing market. So we're expecting trade with Australia to grow by 30% by 2030, and we're expecting it to grow with the wider Pacific region by 65%. And what I want is our farmers to be out there in the wider world selling their premium products. So just on prices, prices in Japan are twice what they are here in the UK.
Okay.
You know, there's a really great market for our farmers.
And it's the same
and I'm
quality.
absolutely confident
We match
that
the
we
quality.
can.
All right.
We're better.
We're better.
We produce the best
Okay.
beef in the world, Nick.
Okay. Terry,
There's no doubt in my mind.
Okay, Secretary of State, thank you. I hear that. Terry, thank you. We must get as many callers on as we can. Brian, you're in Moira. Good morning, Brian, in Northern Ireland, I think. Good morning.
Hi, Nick. Hi, good morning, Nick.
Yes.
I'd just like to ask the Secretary of State, where in the Brexit agreement or Brexit referendum did it ever say that Northern Ireland citizens would be less equal than any of the rest of the citizens in the UK?
Less equal. Secretary of State, if you're...
Well, I don't accept the premise of that question. Lord Frost is working very hard to make sure that the Northern Ireland Protocol is working for the people of Northern Ireland.
Just explain the protocol to listeners who don't understand how it works. How does it work, Secretary of State, the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, what the Northern Ireland Protocol is about making sure that there's a smooth passage of goods from the UK through to Northern Ireland, and that there is proper ability to sell our goods and also use free trade agreements with the rest of the world.
Sorry, so smooth entails border controls and paperwork, is it, and physical inspections?
Well, this is
That's
exactly
smooth,
what
is it?
David Frost is working on, is
Right.
smoothing out some of these issues with the EU.
Well, how are they to be smoothed out then? Either we're going to have this paperwork and these inspections, or we're not.
Well, we can do things in a more efficient, less
Such as?
bureaucratic fashion.
How would we
These
do
are
it?
the details that Lord Frost is currently in negotiations about.
Let's go back to Brian. Brian.
Nick, well, first of all, one of the things that Liz Truss just said, from the UK into Northern Ireland is an integral part of the UK, or that's what we're told anyway. Would Liz Truss, in her Southwest Norfolk constituency, be happy if she has a pet, tried to bring it to London, and to get that pet back into Southwest Norfolk, had to pay vet's bills of £100 to say that animal didn't have rabies? Would she be happy if she goes on holiday? And because she's from Southwest Norfolk, she wouldn't be allowed to avail of duty free.
So what you're saying is if you come over to Norfolk, Manchester, London, you have to pay these vets bills to get your pets to and from, just to clarify, Brian.
Yeah, I have to pay them to get back to Northern Ireland.
Back into where you live. Liz Truss.
Yeah.
Sorry, to clarify, if I said...
But just final point, and then final point for you, Brian, then Liz Truss. Brian, final if you would, so we can get back to the Secretary of State.
The Prime Minister of the UK stated in Parliament that no British Prime Minister could countenance an Irish sea border. He then put that in place. He told lies. Your government told lies in Parliament.
This is a border by another name, isn't it?
So just to clarify, I was talking about GB to Northern Ireland, so I just want to be absolutely clear about that.
Okay.
Of course, Northern Ireland is an absolutely integral part of the UK.
Okay.
There are issues to work out about the operation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and this is what Lord Frost is working on, exactly the type of issues that have just been referenced.
But there is a border currently, isn't there?
What there are is processes that have to be gone through, and that's always been the case. There have always been processes. What we're doing is trying to make sure that the Northern Ireland Protocol works as smoothly as possible. Now, my job as Trade Secretary is making sure that we're able to sell goods from Northern Ireland around the rest of the world, and Northern Ireland's done a fantastic job. I recently met the Foyle Food Group, which is exporting beef, not just to the United States, but also to some of the Asia-Pacific countries I'm talking about. And I make sure that Northern Ireland is an integral part of all of the trade deals I'm striking with the rest of the world. As I've said, Lord Frost is working on the issue of making the protocol work smoothly.
So can you say
but fundamentally, my job is about making sure that Northern Ireland has more options about where to sell its fantastic produce.
So you can say that lastly, the aim of the government is to be in a position where we don't need border controls, border inspections and paperwork. That's the aim.
The aim of the government is to make this as smooth as possible and deal with the issues that our caller's been talking about.
We heard that before, but just to clarify, so we don't need border controls and paperwork.
Absolutely.
That's the position of the government,
Yes.
the aim. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Brian, thank you for that. Do stay in touch. Tess in Kendal. Tess, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Secretary of State.
Hello, Tess. Yes.
Hi. So I have an 11-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter, and I'm really concerned, particularly in the light of high-profile cases such as Sarah Everard's death. I'm concerned about the safety of women, and I want my children to grow up in a different kind of society where we don't have to have these fears. So I want to ask, rather than simply reacting to awful incidents such as this, how can we future-proof society by instilling a positive and proactive approach to tackling this issue? And what tangible actions has the government taken to address these concerns?
Well, I completely share your concerns, and I have 2 teenage daughters, and I also want them to grow up in a world that is much safer, where they can walk around the streets without fear. And I think there are a number of things we have to do. We're conducting a rape review at the moment to make sure that cases are properly dealt with, they're dealt with rapidly. We increase our conviction rate, and we are able to bring more perpetrators to justice. But I also think it's important as part of the education system, we're educating children properly. So we've introduced a new relationship and sex education curriculum so that children are learning about issues like consent before they get older. And I think it's also important that in society as a whole, we drum out behaviour that is abusive and harassment. And I'm concerned, for example, about some of the things that go on social media and the culture that creates as well. But this is something we're working on right across the government. We've got a violence against women and girls strategy. We'll be announcing more steps very shortly.
How concerned are you by a story this morning that shows that less than 2% of rape cases recorded by the police last year resulted in a suspect being charged, says analysis of the Home Office figures provided to the Guardian.
I'm very concerned about that. I'm very concerned about that, Nick. And we need to do more to bring the perpetrators to justice. We need to make it easier for victims to give evidence. I know one of the things the Justice Secretary is looking at is about pre-recorded video, so the whole situation is less traumatic. But it is an issue of massive concern, and we have to deal with this.
But how is it to be dealt with? Noting, of course, that your colleague Robert Buckland is involved as well. If this was any other case, there would be, as I'm sure there is, enormous concern. Less than 2%.
I completely agree, Nick. And this is why we are reviewing the whole process through the justice system. I think it is about making it easier for victims to come forward. I think video evidence is very important, not putting victims through the trauma of some of the court processes that take place at the moment. And, of course, speeding the process up, because these cases are taking too long for the perpetrators to be brought to justice.
Does a Crown Prosecution Service need an overhaul?
I think the overall process, and it's not just the Crown Prosecution Service, it's also the court system, needs to be looked at. That's why we're reviewing it, to see what needs to be improved throughout it.
It's not working,
justice,
if you look at the case of Lady
Justice
Norse,
needs to be quicker. It needs to be quicker, and it needs to be less traumatic for the victims.
Yes. I mean, if you look at the case of Lady Norse, who, of course, was cleared of all charges last week, 17 charges of alleged sexual interference with a young boy. It took them 2 years to get the case to court, and it took 4 hours for the jury to throw it out. That's not working. And indeed, you were a former Justice Secretary yourself, were you not?
Absolutely, I was. And this is something I looked at the time, is making these processes quicker.
And if I'm right, that was about 4 or 5 years ago. So we haven't moved on in 4 or 5 years, have we?
Well, there has been some progress in terms of improving the court process and making it faster. But there is a big issue on rape cases. I completely acknowledge that, and that's why the Justice Secretary is conducting a review.
We've not moved forward, have we? We're going backwards.
We need to do more. We need to do more.
Let's go to other calls. Colette is in Enfield. Colette, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Secretary of State.
Yes.
This week, tomorrow, will mark the fact of the death of George Floyd.
Indeed.
In light of that, what positive things have the government put in place to address concerns around the community? And I look very specifically at the Sewell report, which was trashed quite comprehensively.
This was done by Tony Sewell and suggested that there was not institutional racism and the country had made great advances. Just remind listeners, Colette, that's my job. Go ahead, Colette. Yep.
Thank you, Nick. The question I want to ask is, what has the government achieved in the past year?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think the Sewell report was very important in setting a new agenda for how we're dealing with racial equality
You still put your name
in
to
Britain.
It.
Well, this is a report commissioned by the government. It was an independent report. We are going to be issuing our response to the report soon. But I think it did make some very important points.
You're
There
going to
were
issue
key
your response
issues.
to the report you put out. Do you mean your response to the response it received? Is that what you're saying? Because
No.
you already issued the report.
Yes, but it was a independent report, so the government will respond to it.
Yeah, it was. You must accept, Secretary, it was widely condemned.
Well, there was a lot of support for the report
From whom?
from a number of people. I can't think of them off the top of my head,
well, I mean,
but a lot of people said this actually is a common sense approach to dealing with the issues
Lord Woolley,
we focus.
the head of Black Vote, said it was ridiculous. So many other campaigns. I can give you names. Give me the name of someone who actually lauded it outside of the Prime Minister.
Well, I will get back to you on that. I can't remember offhand.
Can I put it to you? It actually achieved a deafening silence in the terms of support.
Well, we are going to come back with our response
see.
to that report very shortly.
Go ahead.
But the caller asked me what we're doing about this issue.
Yeah.
And my view is that the whole debate about identity politics has distracted us from the key things we need to improve to make Britain more equal. Namely, how do we improve our education system so you're treated fairly regardless of where you are in the country or what ethnic background you're from? How do we make sure our employment system is fair so people are, regardless of whether you're LGBT, black, from a different part of the country, that you're treated fairly? That's what people want us to focus on. And I'm afraid too often this debate has gone off and talked about symbolism and statues rather than talking about the key bread and butter issues people care about. So we're working on an equality data report that's coming out in July, and we're going to be focusing on those key issues of education, employment and enterprise.
Okay, quick one-sentence response, Colette, if I could, from you.
Simply not acceptable. That response was not acceptable. The mere fact that we've got a Secretary of State who criticised the Equality Act and says, in effect, that it's fashionable to be concerned around data, around education, the health system, the legal system, and to say that this is sort of a fashionable thing to do is not acceptable at all.
All right, OK. Just lastly, just to clarify, you can't actually give me the name of anybody outside of Boris Johnson who supported the Sewell report, can you?
Well, I would be guessing if I did.
OK. All right. OK. Well, let's not do that. We move to the next. Thank you, Colette. Oh, Alison's in Norfolk. Alison, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Secretary of State.
Hello, Alison.
I lost my father, Ron, to the virus in January, and I joined COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice, where I've had support from thousands of other families with similar stories. I'm also a constituent of yours in Norfolk, as was my late father. In fact, you actually met him on occasions. Like many others, the news of the Indian variant and a potential third wave fills me with dread at the prospect of more families experiencing the pain and loss that ours has. Will the government not bring its inquiry forward so that key lessons can be learnt to protect lives ahead of the coming winter? And at the very least, will they not meet with us to hear our perspective, especially since the judicial review, which we had planned to seek, has since been cancelled, which your government had previously given as a reason for not meeting with us?
Why the delay, Secretary of
Well,
State?
first of all, can I offer my condolences and say I'm very sorry to hear about your father, and I'd be very happy to meet you as your constituency MP to talk about what can be done. In terms of the government, government ministers are working flat out to make sure that we don't see this Indian variant have a negative effect. We've stepped up test and trace. We've stepped up vaccination in the affected areas. There is the good news that vaccination is working against the Indian variant and other variants. And really, that is our focus at the moment.
But
it's
why
all
the delay?
hands.
Why the delay?
It's all hands on the pump. We're still in the middle of this crisis, Nick, and it is all hands to the pump.
We're in the middle. We're not even coming to so June 21st. We're in the middle.
Well, we're coming to the. What I'm saying is, it's not. The crisis is not over, and we can't be complacent. And we really do need to focus all the government's resources on getting the vaccination programme rolled out, dealing with the test and trace regime. And now is not the time to be analysing and having the report. We will have that report in due course. But
I think meeting with relatives? Is there not? Could at least not the meetings take place? So the greater
as I've said, I'm very happy to have this meeting, and
but there are
absolutely.
Others. Could there not be that part that while testimony is so fresh in the minds of these poor individuals who've lost loved ones, could that part of the inquiry not begin now?
Well, I'm sure meetings are taking place, and I've just offered to have a meeting to discuss this issue and actually represent these views. But personally, I'm not so involved in the coronavirus response as my colleagues, but I know that they are absolutely flat out dealing with this, and I do think that's a priority because we have to get to the end of this.
OK, we're coming to the end of our time together. Let's get one. Thank you. And Alison, again, condolences both as Secretary of State and myself to you for your dad. Joe in Brent, possibly the last question. Joe, go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Secretary of State. My question's about conversion therapy, which you've just announced a ban. And there are concerns from people who are experts in what's happening with transgender youths in particular and children, that conversion therapy may may bring in the affirmation model, which means that anybody who's particularly medics or psychotherapists or counsellors who are dealing with trans people who believe that they're transgender but who may actually be autistic or gay or going through a phase, we do have this new phenomenon now of detransitioners. And women in particular coming forward saying that they believe they were trans and they weren't.
Question. Yeah.
So with the ban on conversion therapy, have you found a way of bridging the gap between banning the conversion of gay people but also allowing investigation of people who present as trans to, in particular, medical experts?
Thank you, Joe. Secretary of State.
Well, we are determined to ban conversion therapy. It's horrendous that people are being tried to be, diverted from what they actually are, whether it's being gay or being trans. However, I am very clear that for the under 18s, we need to continue to protect people from making irreversible decisions before they are fully capable of making those decisions about the future. So that is something that we will be consulting on as part of our move towards legislation to ban conversion therapy. So we're very clear that coercive practices, harmful practices need to be banned, but we must make sure that we are protecting under 18-year-olds from making irreversible decisions about their future.
Thanks for that. Just a couple of questions from me, Secretary of State. Over the weekend, Dominic Cummings tweeted online, herd immunity wasn't a secret strategy, it was, capitals, the official, public, explained on TV/radio strategy. Do you recognise that? Is that the truth, that herd immunity was the strategy?
Well, I attended a number of meetings of Cabinet at that time, and herd immunity was never the declared strategy.
Not on one occasion?
No.
OK. To other matters, it's been reported this morning the Belarus government diverted a plane bound for Lithuania in order to arrest an opposition journalist. Presumably you won't be in line or queuing up to do trade with a country such as Belarus, will we?
Well, we're not in negotiations with Belarus, it won't surprise you to hear. But what happened was absolutely appalling, and I know the Foreign Secretary is working very hard to deal with this and make sure something like that never happens again.
Shouldn't the ambassador be called in pretty swift?
Well, I'm sure things like that are happening.
You're sure they're happening? OK. A couple of other things happened overnight. You maybe were, again, touching on your brief as Equalities Minister. Black Lives Matter activist Sasha Cohen is critical after being shot in the head, police investigating. She was a member of the so-called Initiative Party. A response on that level of violence?
Well, it's appalling that level of violence is taking place in London.
OK. This is a difficult one. Didn't think I'd ever talk to you about this. Is it fair to say that a woman has a vagina? The reason I ask you this question is a university student, Lisa Keogh, has been censored over offensive and discriminatory comments she made during lectures by saying that to be a woman you need to possess that particular organ. Liz Truss.
Women do have vaginas, Nick.
This student, unfortunately, has been censored over that. What would you say to those who seek to censor her?
Well, I think we need to uphold our very, very important tradition of free speech.
The Martin Bashir case. What does the BBC need to learn, Secretary of State?
Well, the BBC needs to look very hard at itself and how it has behaved over this case.
How might it fare internationally? You meet with delegates all over the world, all over the time. That is your brief. I would imagine it is probably known across the globe. A scandal, if I can use that word. How much damage might it do globally?
Well, the BBC has been a respected institution internationally, but we need to protect that reputation, and the BBC needs to take action to deal with this terrible scandal that's taken place.
And what action should that be, Secretary of State?
Well, I won't go into the details, but fundamentally the way the BBC operates needs to change.
And does it need
And I know that my colleague Oliver Dowden is looking at this.
Absolutely. It needs a separate regulatory body?
Well, I'm not going to comment on exactly the structure that needs to be in place, but clearly there have been major failings here.
And lastly, is it time for a fresh Brexit? I speak of the Eurovision Song Contest. Liz Truss, I've no idea if you're a fan. If not, let me fill you in. There's consternation, I think only for the second time, but don't quote me, I'm no expert in this field. Britain scored the famous null point, or 0 points. Is it a post-Brexit snub? Is it that, I can't believe I'm saying this, we can't make music? I would have thought that one thing we can do is the UK. Again, international trade, Eurovision Song Contest. Liz Truss.
I think there's a fundamental problem with the way that we are choosing our performances and singers for the Eurovision Song Contest, because I don't think it's a post-Brexit snub. I think we need to have more competition to get the right entrant. I think they need to be more tested with the public. I'm here today at LBC responding to questions from listeners. That's the kind of testing that we need our song contest entrant to go through. So maybe it should be LBC that's running it, not the BBC, Nick.
I don't think I could ever fill the shoes of the late, great Terry Wogan or even Graham Norton. But it's an interesting idea, nor do I particularly want to dress in tinfoil or try and wrestle that one. But it's been enjoyable having you here on Call the Cabinet. Liz Truss, thank you. Appearing here on LBC Where News with Thomas What's His Next.
The International Trade Secretary Liz Truss has told LBC she is fully confident British farmers will be able to compete with their Australian rivals. It follows reports of a cabinet rift over plans to cut import tariffs on goods such as beef and lamb. Ministers have urged British tourists to stay away from Spain after Madrid opened the doors to travellers from the UK. They can now enter the country without any health requirements or the need to provide a coronavirus test result. A leading figure in the Black Lives Matter movement is in a critical condition after a shooting in southeast London. Sasha Johnson, who is 27, was found with head injuries in Peckham early yesterday morning. The weather, a mixture of sunny spells and showers for most parts of the UK, hail and thunder possible across England and Wales, feeling cool, a high of 15 Celsius.
This is LBC.